Good evening, comrades, friends, family. We wanted to talk with you all, build at this arguably the biggest crisis in the history of the Democratic Party, their implosion. What are people saying out there? So we're here with Eddie and Carlos. We'll roll out the international, and we have some other bullet points that we'll cover. So good to see everybody. Stay tuned.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We got a poll running right now. Who do you think lost the presidential debate, Trump, Biden, or the American people at large? Let us know your answers, and we'll analyze them at the end of the segment. But how are you fellas doing?
I'm doing good. How's my mic working and sounding? Is it all good?
Perfect.
Good. I was traveling recently, so I had to get my setup going again, but it was great to see the family on vacation, but excited to be back here discussing everything that there is to discuss with you guys.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Today, the sun wasn't blazing too much here in New York City. It was good to catch Carlos one last time before I left the Houston area. I had never been to Houston, the fourth biggest proletariat in the U.S., fourth biggest city, and just completely coincidental, unpredictable. I was able to go out to Houston twice in June. I was able to find some work out there, so just super grateful to be back home.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. By the way, for those that haven't seen it, Eddie had a great conversation with Sarah from DD Geopolitics, John from the Institute and Infrared, and the great Dan Kovalik on his new book, The Case for Palestine, as all of his other books are. It's an absolute must read, so go check it out. If you're also interested in great literature on Palestine, specifically contextualized literature that deals with the current genocide, Danny's magnificent book, This is Genocide, 48 Poems for Gaza. It's also tremendous. It has poetry, which is top-tier poetry, but it also has about a 80-page introduction where he provides a Marxist analysis of the Zionist entity and Palestinian struggle and everything else, unlike anyone. So make sure to get both of those great books on Palestine if you want to learn more about the ongoing genocide and the imperialist system that has produced it.
And make sure to get Carlos's new book, which I would hold up right now, except it's coming in the mail recently. Why We Need American Marxism, catching up to Jordan Peterson on the charts. Very exciting to see how well the book is doing and the early response to it. So not that I'm surprised, people have a level of faith built up by now with the content or the books that we're putting out and how high quality they are. And after the Purity Fetish too, I think people are excited to see Carlos's sophomore work in terms of book writing. So I got to get mine done too. I got to get my Venezuela book done. I had too many things I want to do.
Yeah, we might get another exciting project from Eddie before that Venezuela one. So stay tuned.
Yeah. I'm excited about what I've been cooking up in the stew. I spent like 4 hours on it today. Yeah.
So there's Carlos's new book at Midwestern Marx. So I'll start off with this headline here. This is from Democracy Now. Democrats have serious conversation about Biden's disastrous debate performance. I think it's amazing how much the Democratic brass is actually not panicking. The base is panicking. A study came out from CBS that 73% of American voters do not think that Joe Biden has the necessary health and wherewithal to be president. Never mind the fact that we're on, 260? I lost track of the days. We're in the 9th month of genocide. And when I said this is the biggest crisis internally in the Democratic Party, that's, of course, from their perspective. Because for them, as they maimed and murdered Vietnamese and the Koreans from 1950 to 1953, and so many different horrific foreign policy, not decisions, not this or that particularly policy, but the very nature, the very systemic nature of imperialism, that would never be considered a crisis by the Democrats. But so far, they're not saying that they're going to replace Biden. So I wanted to hear you all's thoughts on that.
Well, I think that one of the things we've been seeing consistently from the ideologues of imperialism is the expectation that what the people can directly experience and see and feel and understand is supposed to be completely rejected. And what the American people have been seeing since before even the 2020 election, when the debates specifically were going on, is that Biden, in terms of his cognitive capacities, is not the same raggedy old war criminal that brought us a prison quote unquote reform that enjailed a bunch of black people and other minorities. He's not the same individual. He has obviously undergone severe cognitive decline, and it's only intensified in the last 3-4 years as president. So the liberal media the whole time has just completely rejected and called you a conspiracy theorist for stating what is literally obvious. And it came to a point where we had this debate, and it's completely irrefutable. The pundits themselves are like, how did we get here? We've been telling the whole world, like, we have a president. His nickname is Decrepit Joe Biden for a reason. And I mean, there was, maybe folks don't remember, but the same day that Tucker interviewed Putin, the day it was released, I think as a part of hiding the insights of that interview, there was a report that came out that said that a report on Biden's physical capacities and mental capacities. It basically said that Biden cannot be held responsible for his actions because of the condition that he's in. So it should come as a shock to no one except the liberal media that has been literally telling the American people, reject what is obvious and right in front of your face. It should come as a shock to no one that Biden is completely decrepit. And Trump is not the Trump, as Eddie has mentioned in videos and others, it's not the Trump from 2016. It's not even the Trump from 2020. He's trying to out-Zionist Biden. And the flair that Trump had, what attracted him to the MAGA base, which was the ability to present himself as someone who is going to drain the swamp, someone who's anti-establishment, that flair, what existed of it as a veneer of radicality, is completely gone. He's become, not only in substance but now in form as well, a swamp monster. And I think that the MAGA base, the working class part that we care about, is going to be up for grabs, because these are people that are more anti-war than ever. And that's where communists have to be. Where there's discontented people, that's where we have to be. And the whole country is discontented right now. I think, to answer the poll, that Americans in general lost at that debate, which is symbolic of the state of American imperialism.
Absolutely. I mean, there were a lot of Trump people I know who were doing the hashtag dark MAGA thing, which was the idea that Trump needed to come back in 2020, but be more ruthless and get these swamp creatures like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton out of his administration. But he's gone the opposite direction. Like you said, he's trying to out Zionist Joe Biden. He's talking about making Nikki Haley his VP, this, arch neocon, who he would, only be making his VP for identity politics reasons or to try and get the establishment Republican vote. And it's like, why are you appealing to establishment Republicans? And it's because, he's a fraud. He's never, it was fun to watch him rip through the corrupt Republican candidates in 2016. But like you said, that Trump is long gone. And like Jamie Lynn said, and a lot of MAGA people, like you said, they're anti-war and they're watching all these guns be funneled to Israel, all these high-tech weapons and money be funneled to Israel. And they see it as the same type of thing as Ukraine, and Trump will criticize Ukraine, but he won't criticize Israel. So a lot of people are seeing through it, and that's where it's on us to meet them where they're at and talk to them about it and show them that Trump is a fraud. And but to your point about Biden, the cognitive decline is so obvious. I was with my parents this week, and my dad is a longtime viewer of our show, and he's no fan of Biden, but he just hates Trump, right? He sees Trump as arrogant, a bully, a liar. He sees right through Trump's facade. He doesn't fall for it at all. But he, some older people are more susceptible to Joe Biden's shtick, his "I'm just a friendly old grandpa" shtick. So I told my parents to watch that video where Joe Biden is dressing down Scott Ritter, and he's being everything that Trump is. He's being a bully. He's being a narcissist. He's being a war criminal. He's being arrogant when he's in the wrong. But my point being, in that video, Biden is so much sharper, so much, more energy, so much clearer when he speaks. Like, the cognitive decline is obvious. And I've been one of these people who hasn't even talked about it that much because, every time there's a new video of Biden doing something weird, I only see the clip, right? It's not like I'm watching full Biden speeches all the time. And then the Democratic media says, oh, this is misinformation. This is AI. This is edited. This is blah, blah, blah. So, I try not to jump to any conclusions. Oh, one of my lights just went out. I try not to jump to any conclusions about it because you can just criticize Biden on policy. But this debate just made it so glaringly obvious to the point where you have CNN, talk like, how did we get here? Van Jones was almost crying. I say, I love Biden. Biden's a good man. I can't bear to see him up there. He can't even defend genocide as sharp as he used to. So it's the crisis of legitimacy with our political system is only getting worse, and it's only creating the opportunity for us to organize people against the system. And one thing I would have a question for Danny. I asked my parents about this. They didn't have too much of an answer, but you were alive, or you were, I'm assuming, maybe this is rude, and I'm getting my timelines wrong, but were you alive during the second Reagan administration when he was dealing with Alzheimer's? And how does that compare to Biden today?
Thank God you didn't ask if he was alive during the Second World War.
I was getting ready. How did you organize during the 1930s, during the Great Depression, Danny? As soon as he said, I asked my parents and then looked at me, I was like, uh-oh, where's this going? I remember 1984. I was 5 years old, and my auntie, I won't say her first name, she was a big Reaganite. She was definitely had racist qualities as well. I was a little kid. I don't remember Reagan with dementia. I've never seen anything like this. And then, the New York Times, the editorial board the next day, the debate was last Thursday, right? The next day on Friday, the New York Times, so cutting edge. It's tough to say we love Joe Biden, but we have to say this. He's not qualified. And the American people are like, yeah, no kidding. No SHIT. Like, the cognitive dissonance that Carlos talked about. So, I'm here in New York City, and there's no lack of liberals over here. And I think it's important that we respond to concerns and critiques from both political parties across the ideological spectrum. What do we say to women across the country, specifically in states where abortion rights no longer exist or they've been under attack? Because I think for me, it's easy to almost celebrate how pathetic the Democrats are. Because why would I celebrate that? It's a loss for the American people, but it forces them to reckon, to think critically, to break with this pathetic corporate party, the party of genocide, the party of kleptocracy, the party of colonial foreign policy. But they have sought to paint themselves as the better option within this lesser of two evils. As organizers, as ideologues, as leaders in our communities and our unions, how do we respond that any student debt relief? I didn't get any student debt relief. Most of us haven't got it. Biden supposedly tried to pass it. Maybe some people certainly got some relief. But even these crumbs that we get from the Democrats, how do we respond when people bring that up?
I think as far as the abortion issue, it's clear that it benefits the Democrats to not actually pass it. They've had more than enough time to codify Roe v. Wade, and they haven't. And it's very clear why they haven't. It's because they need it as a political football. They need the existence of abortion rights being on the line, about to be stripped by Republicans, so that they can have at least a little slither of something to distinguish themselves to the American public from the Republican Party, when both parties are in reality parties of capital that are indistinguishable in their economic policy and their imperial policy. And I would even say in the substance of their social policies, because if they're actually committed to these liberal values that they claim to be committed to, they would actually codify them. But again, that would remove their capacity to present themselves as the champions of these liberal values that are now under threat by the so-called fascist right. So it's always been treated as a political football, will continue to be treated as a political football. I think student loans is another example of that. They have more than enough capacity to codify anything right now, basically, and to erase however much debt as they want, and they're not doing it. They're just going to tell you that they're going to do it next time around so that you vote for them. And then they're going to ignore everything that they promised you. And that's what we've seen, not just from Biden, but from literally every single administration, because the politicians do not represent the American people. They represent the exploiters, the oppressors, the parasitic creditors of the American people, not the American public. And it's similar to immigration. I mean, the right tells you that immigrants are flooding over the gates by the millions. They're taking all types of jobs. It used to be all types of jobs. Now, according to Trump, it's black jobs, which is, I don't know. I've never seen a job where only black people can work at, but whatever. That became a whole meme in the internet, Mexicans taking black jobs. But the same issue that happens with the Democrats with abortion happens with the Republicans with immigration policy. They don't actually want to close the border. They don't actually want the comprehensive immigration reform that destroys the precondition for the migration crisis, which is rooted, of course, in imperialism. But they'll never do anything about it, precisely because the same capitals that back them, which also back the Democrats, they require migrant labor so they can have a cheap pool of quote unquote illegal labor that they can super exploit and not be subjected to any of the laws and regulations that they would be subjected to if those workers were American citizens, or not in such a precarious condition. So whether it's the immigration issue with the Republicans or abortion with the Democrats, these are issues that are used as political footballs to get to rile up the bases to vote for them. And I think the American public is tired of this. They see through it. It's been decades on end trying to pull the same stunt on the American people, and they're tired.
Absolutely. I do believe in harm reduction voting. Like, if Bernie Sanders was running this year, I would probably tell people to go vote for him. I see people saying Bernie 2024. I'm sure Lila was saying this as a joke, or, I wish Bernie was still around. But there were people like Cenk Uygur who were actually saying, Bernie should run in 2024. Like, these people are completely stuck in 2016. But anyways, if there was a real harm reduction candidate who was talking about, Medicare for all, and all of these, or, and making what are half measures, what are technocratic, neoliberal changes to the system, but they're changes that would vastly improve many people's lives, like universal health care, I would go vote for Bernie Sanders, or I'd vote for a social democrat. But I just don't see that in Joe Biden. I see someone who is maybe a better face on the empire than Trump. Maybe not in some ways, especially if Trump is moving towards more establishment rhetoric and not taking the mask off the empire as much. When Biden's basically decaying from dementia in front of our eyes. I don't know which one makes the empire look worse at this point, but for me, with the abortion thing, especially like growing up in the Christian church and knowing so many people who are pro-life, like, and this is, more a commentary on the issue itself, I guess, than on Biden, but it does, as Carlos said, I see it as a political football for both sides, because they divide and polarize it by, you're either pro-life or you're pro-choice. Right? You're okay with abortions at 8.5 months pregnant, or you're, not okay with any abortions at all. And it's like, well, hold on. That's not the dialectical view, right? For me, an abortion at 4 weeks, when it's like a tiny little clump of cells that doesn't resemble any human life, that's just a surgery. That's just a regular operation. But an abortion at 5 months, well, at what point is there a cutoff? There's got to be a cutoff somewhere. And this conversation isn't allowed in the halls of Congress. It's just, pro-life, pro-choice, and the other side's evil. And I think that's by design. I think that's so, we can't bring the American people together and say, let's have a real conversation about abortion. Let's really figure out our abortion policy. Or, nobody's proposing the idea of maybe women should make the choice about abortion, right? Maybe men should have like 20% say and women should have 80% say, because it's affecting them. There's no like real serious solutions being proposed. And then you have Biden saying, right, positing himself as the savior of Roe v. Wade. And obviously the Brett Kavanaugh was appointed under Trump, but still, it's like the Roe v. Wade was repealed under a Democratic administration. And Biden and Obama missed their opportunities to push to codify Roe v. Wade into law, because they don't want to codify it into law. They want it to be a political football so they can, shame people into the voting booth.
In terms of a harm reduction vote, I think it's worth mentioning that last week, Jamal Bowman, one of the quote unquote progressive House reps, was defeated here in the Bronx, and also he represents part of Yonkers and Mount Vernon, Westchester County. AIPAC went after Jamal Bowman with tens of millions of dollars. And, what does that mean? Jamal Bowman was somebody who took the trip to occupied Palestine. What's called in the corporate media Israel. Pains us, of course, to say that 9 months into colonial genocide. Is that somebody we would stand with? Jamal Bowman. He initially denounced all of our protests on October 8th and 9th and 10th, and said that, like Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, that we were quote unquote Hamas and all of that. how would you see, like, would you see the Jamal Bowman type of election as a potential harm reduction case?
I'm trying to pull something up for that one. So if you want to take a stab at it first, Eddie.
Yeah, I might have gone out and voted for Jamal Bowman if I was in that area. I wouldn't have thrown all my support behind him. The video of him talking about Ukraine was utterly embarrassing. And obviously, you know, I don't expect Jamal Bowman to go in there with the squad. You know, I expect him to go, or I mean, he was already in there, but I expect him to do exactly what the squad did. You know, virtue signal a lot and take slightly better positions on certain issues than the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, but refuse to really, you know, dig in his heels and fight for anything like Medicare for all with a situation like force the vote. I don't think he was in office when the force the vote thing went down, but I imagine he would have lined up behind the squad in a situation like that. And I see the same stuff from him that you see from a lot of social democrats, virtue signaling and whatnot. So I guess if I lived in that area, I probably would have gone out and voted for him. I don't know if I would have, you know, I definitely would have encouraged people to put a bunch of energy into campaigning for him. You know, I would have encouraged people to put their energy elsewhere. But I do think the main story, you know, and I get why people are hypercritical of Jamal Bowman. But I guess I don't really get the communists like rubbing it in his face that he lost, because I think the main story from that election is the AIPAC money that went in, right? Like that's the main narrative that we should be pushing. Look, you had this moderate candidate, who's still corrupt, who's still imperialistic on all these issues, but he took one, you know, a soft pro-Palestinian position, and AIPAC dumped in all this money to get him kicked out. It's a microcosm of how our system works. And I think that's the main narrative we should be focusing on when it comes to his election.
I agree that we have to emphasize the amount of AIPAC money that went into his opponent and has gone into many others. But I think the RTSG guys here are kind of getting at something as far as the reason why he lost. The Bowman was someone who was very friendly with the Zionists, voted in favor in 2021 to give more money to Israel, voted in favor of condemning all sexual instances of violence committed by Hamas. So again, propaganda stories that are absolutely essential in legitimizing Israel's genocide, covered under the auspices of Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, defend itself from who? Well, from these dehumanized beings that we are going to lie about, say that they raped women. We're going to say that they beheaded babies. So all of these lies were spread by people like Bowman and other so-called progressives. So he lent not only material but ideological support to the Zionist entity. And I think we're at a period in time where you really got to get people excited to vote. And he completely disconnected himself from his base by having precisely that soft pro-Palestine or softer pro-Israel position. And I think there's a good chance that had he taken a perhaps more principled position, he would have gotten more people excited to vote and actually, to organize and do all these things, because we reduce it to voting. But it's that's just the last step. It's like there's a whole lot of organizing and canvassing and stuff like that happens after. And if you're someone who's committed to stopping the Zionist entity, it's genocide, if you're committed to fighting for Palestinian freedom, are you really going to get excited to canvass for someone like Bowman, who provides such a soft support, but nonetheless support for the Zionist entity? I think not. And what we're seeing is, I think, the general crumbling of the so-called progressive left. It's the sort of mirror of part of what we're seeing from the MAGA parts of the right wing movement and the political spectrum that present themselves as dissenters but are not actually dissenting to anything. we're seeing the same thing on the left. People are generally tired of the so-called squad and all these different programs. I mean, they just had a little rally before the voting. There was maybe at most 1,000 people there. Bernie alone would have pulled 10, 15,000 in that part of New York in 2016. So that progressive movement has died. And the people that supported it once, I don't think a lot of them have changed their inclination to actually fight for progress. What has happened is that they've realized that the social democratic route, as it exists in the US, is garbage and it takes us nowhere. I think that once a new political movement, perhaps more radical, more principled, better organized, more honest, more embedded in the masses, takes shape, that energy from 2016 is going to reemerge in a higher, more developed form in that movement. And hopefully it emerges soon enough. But what I'm seeing is a general apathy from the people that in 2016 were very excited about progressives. And I think that's why Bowman lost, besides also the Zionist money.
Another talking point that I hear over and over from students and contacts and friends and family members is, well, if you think it's bad now in Palestine, what if Trump comes into office January 20th? And I'm like, so the genocide is going to be accelerated? What is your argument? Biden just sent 18 billion more, as he's kind of said out of the side of his mouth at a few different, at the State of the Union, he said something to the effect that enough was enough, that Israel had to slow up somehow, but then sends another $18 billion in F-35s and F-16 bomber jets over the trapped people of Palestine, who continue to resist. I mean, it's amazing. The Israelis have had, the Zionists, the colonizers have had a horrible weekend and last week. They try to say that their casualties hover around 300. That's a bold-faced lie. They want to appear invincible. Hezbollah continues to give them the most serious headache. The north of Israel is basically, they're unable to live there. I don't know if the Israelis, the Zionists, the occupiers, the occupation's ever been pushed so deep within the 1967 borders. So just to do a little bit of the devil's advocate, if come, let's see, 1 year from right now, when Trump will be on his 4th or 5th month, if these liberals can show me that somehow life has become worse than a genocide, is there such a thing as life worse than a genocide? That's an interesting question. So when I talked to y'all about this stream, I thought it was important to respond bullet point by bullet point. I'll throw out another juicy one to y'all, whoever can take it. This is something else you'll hear a lot in Maine and Massachusetts. They say, well, right now, in the backwoods of Michigan and Maine, there's 300 and some odd Nazis, and they're armed to the teeth and they're training. And, if Trump's elected, we're all in danger. How can you, Danny, take this lightly? So I'll let y'all have a feast with that one.
Eddie, do you want to go? I've gone first the last. Oh no, you went first.
You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
I think that one of the things that happens even on the left, I've heard friends of mine say this, is that yes, we're dealing with two fascists, but we have on the one side a Hitler and on the other side a Mussolini. I think that couldn't be any more wrong. The difference that we're actually dealing with, if we even want to speak about it in terms of difference, is one between Himmler and Hitler. Like, they're both Nazis. They're both genocidal maniacs using the people's money when the people are struggling to fund genocides and Nazis in Ukraine. So there's no... How do you get worse than a genocide? I mean, it also assumes that it's directly America calling the shots in Israel, and that's kind of not the case. Yes, we fund them. Yes, we give them the money. Yes, on big things we give them the thumbs up. We give them the weapons, but Israel's actions sometimes even catch Biden supposedly off guard. I mean, it could all be bullshit. Like Garland Nixon makes the point that the supposed catching off guard and condemnations, slight as though they might be, from Biden towards various activities that Israel has done, that it's all for play, and that there's actually deep coordination behind the scenes. I mean, look, I think that the genocide is going to continue regardless of who is elected. I think it's foolish, especially for people that are critical thinkers and that call themselves communists, to even assume that someone coming to the presidency from either party can actually make a difference for a state that, in terms of policies and trajectory, is not controlled at all by who's the commander in chief, or what party is in power. I mean, it's controlled, let's be frank, by a deep state. That that's the term our people use for it. It's controlled by an imperialist group of people that have a policy in mind and that execute it, and they present us with the illusion of having a choice of different political outcomes, but there's, in substance, no real difference there. So I think the genocide is going to continue regardless of who gets elected. The real question might be Ukraine. Is the mass slaughter of people, Ukrainians just being thrown into the meat grinder by the state that claims to be defending them, this condition that has led to more than 500,000 Ukrainians dying. I mean, I know some of them are Banderite Nazi scum, but not all of them. It's just there's a whole lot of people that are probably politically indifferent that are just getting conscripted into the Ukrainian army, thrown into areas like Bakhmut, where people die within 4 hours of entering the battlefield. I mean, it's horrendous. Trump has presented himself as the guy that's going to solve that, end it in a day. He seems a little bit less strong on that issue than he was some months ago. So we'll see. In terms of the genocide, it's going to continue either way.
Absolutely. I agree. Something my mom used to say all the time is that she tried not to get too involved in politics because no matter who gets elected president, her life doesn't change that much. And, I used to look at that completely negatively. And I'm like, what do you mean? How can you not be involved in politics? Your life could be so much better if we would change things. But the older I've gotten, the more I've realized she's correct. And, not saying people shouldn't be involved in politics. Of course they should. But we have to understand who the real enemy is. It's the economic ruling class. It's the donors and lobbyists that completely control the political system. It's the intelligence agencies and the so-called deep state that spy on us and suppress, any left-wing sentiment among the people, and who are really calling the shots. Like when Trump was in office, he tried to do like a Hail Mary before he pulled out. Before he left office, he tried to pull troops out of all these different places. And the Pentagon and the State Department were just like, no, we're not going to do that. Even though he's supposed to be the commander in chief, they're not going to let him get in the way of the structure of empire. And, we know that the executive office isn't enough to change the structure of empire. And, that's what it would take to really bring an end to the Zionist genocide. It would take the U.S. Going against Israel at the International Court of Justice, or the U.S., withholding weapons sales and funding to Israel. And I think what the recent ceasefire proposal was, that Biden and the U.S. were pushing so hard, and that Biden was saying is going to bring an end to this conflict. I think that was Biden and the U.S. trying to send a message to Netanyahu, trying to tell Netanyahu, hey, chill out. We're in an election year. We're getting hammered over this Israel issue. Stop doing all this horrific violence in public. Do a 6-week ceasefire deal so we can get credit for it and we can win the election. And, what did Netanyahu do? He was like, no, we don't really want to do that. The war on Gaza is going to continue. We have to eliminate Hamas. So the Zionist entity is so psychopathic, and it does have a mind of its own. People debate who controls which. Israel controls the U.S. or the U.S. controls Israel. They're both their own unique entities, and they're both arms of international finance capital. But the existing right-wing extremist Israeli government is just a natural progression of a European colonial project, a European ethno-state founded on Arab land. And it's now been developing for 75 years to the point where we have these insane figureheads like Netanyahu or Naftali Bennett, to talk about one of the most insane Zionists in a position of power. So the president we elect isn't going to be able to affect this genocide at all. The IDF is going to continue to do what they do. The only people who can really bring an end to the genocide are Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and the people there, or communists in the United States. If we were to have a revolution in the United States and really change the structure of our system and kick out the deep state and actually drain the swamp, that could have an effect. But voting in bourgeois elections is not going to do it. And bourgeois elections are just a big house of mirrors. They keep you wandering around looking for the truth, looking for progress, and it never comes. And then eventually you're burnt out and apathetic, like a lot of the progressives we've seen, and a lot of the progressives who didn't vote for Jamal Bowman this weekend. And it's exactly what CPUSA is too. CPUSA is a big house of mirrors. They draw you into CPUSA, and then you just spend your time chasing your tail around for 7 years supporting Democrats until nothing changes and everything gets worse and you're just disillusioned. So that's the main thing. Like, if that's why I say, I would go out and vote for Jamal Bowman, but I'm not putting time and effort into campaigning for him or telling other people to do that, because that's how they co-opt our radical energy and get us to organize for nothing.
I want to approach the Palestine question dialectically as well, because as we've laid out, we don't take the lone individual, the big general, the big president who made history. That's not how history is made. History is made by masses of people in motion, organized, mobilized, to quote Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela. Big election coming up at the end of this month in Venezuela, and Bolivarians from across the Americas and the world will be in Caracas, including hopefully some of our people. Dialectically, I can't go back to the 1980s like Eddie wanted, but I can go back to September 24th, 2005. We had about 500,000 people surround the White House and the Pentagon because the liberals at that point had labeled the second U.S. war of aggression against Iraq as George Bush's war, as the neocon war. And the demonstrations were so big because there was a Republican presidency, a Hawk presidency, a Bush presidency. So 2008, the war against Iraq rages on, the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan rages on, and our demonstrations went from hundreds of thousands in Times Square and at the Pentagon and in Chicago, LA, San Francisco, across the country. Now there's Barack Obama's in power, and he's got a nice jump shot, and he's savvy, and he's, suddenly our demonstrations were hundreds of people. Like, you could begin to count everyone who was showing up in the streets. So when we approach this dialectically, if Trump had been in office, how would the American populace have responded to this genocide? Would liberals have been in the street? CNN and MSNBC continue to say that it's a war on Hamas. They say it's Israel versus Hamas. The House of Representatives is trying to pass new legislation that it would be illegal to even count and publicly report on the number of casualties in Palestine. And the numbers that they give right now, I think it's now at, I don't know if it's 38,000 or 39,000, the number that they're giving. Officially, of course, they always have to say, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, because I guess every Palestinian baby is Hamas. Every Palestinian mother and grandmother is the Qassam brigades, who, as I said earlier, they continue to fight back. And we will be studying Palestinian resistance and supporting it for decades and centuries to come. A lot of these weapons are homemade weapons. It's really a tribute to what the Vietnamese and the Koreans and every invaded country, Ho Chi Minh, the people's general and president, had that quote that we don't care how sophisticated your napalm and your bombs and your tanks are, we have something called the will to be free and independent. And that political will is stronger than the most sophisticated arms on earth. And, at this point, we would have to calculate that, not considering the casualties on October 7th, but since then, how many occupation soldiers have died in Gaza. You got to be talking about, in the thousands. But they don't want to share those numbers because they don't want to show the damage that Iran did, that Hezbollah did, because they want to maintain this image, and they attempt to convince themselves that they're the force of good, and everyone else, all the native people of the area, the 1 billion, half a billion Arabs and Kurds and all the native people of the area are, of course, the bad people, but the white European descendant colonizers, they're, of course, the force of light. So I'm going to respond to this because I think what some leftists and some liberals and some leftists would be very offended to think that they were making liberal talking points, because some of these leftists that I've been in dialogue with hate the Democrats, but think that the strategic move is to have a popular front, a united front with the Democrats to defeat fascism. So I'll go back to that dark lurking image up in Michigan, or I don't know, what's the other liberal nightmare state, Maine. So you have these squads of Nazis, and not to downplay that there are militias and white supremacist militias. But I don't know if y'all remember in 2016, but the corporate media, the liberal media, and I think one of our starting points is that liberalism is hegemony. The CIA and the FBI have written editorials in the New York Times for how many years they're against Trump and Trump can't be president. Why would the very essence of the state, to say deep state to me is repetitive. The state's always hidden in deep, and other times it's right in your face, like the NYPD and their brutality. But to think that Trump wins, hate crimes are up 600 percentage points in 48 hours, is that sociologically possible? Is that fear mongering? Again, not to take away from how emboldened the anti-gay forces, the anti-abortion forces, the anti-women forces, the racist forces. I mean, there is dog whistling coming from Trump. I mean, Trump, remember when Trump said before the entire world something about the Proud Boys, and he said, wait for my next command. I mean, whew. So your response to these fears, are they legitimate fears? Are hate crimes on January 22nd, 2025 going to go up 6,000 by 6,000%? Or is it 60,000%? Is it 600%? What do y'all think?
I mean, it's impossible to predict for sure. And, those are statistics I fell for back in the day, too. And I was like, oh, my goodness, all these hate crimes are on the rise because of Trump. And since I've seen how the ADL manipulates, Jewish hate crime statistics in order to push a narrative, and I've become more skeptical of them. But I'll tell you what I do know is that Nazis and people like Nick Fuentes are gaining a lot of followers right now under the Biden administration. And the number one thing that they're using to do it is Israel's genocide. They just point to the genocide all day long and try and blame it on Jews, rather than looking at the structure of the system and realizing that Israel is a neo-colonial outpost of capitalist imperialism. And they don't try and deconstruct the Zionist ideology at all, because if they did, they'd realize their ideology was the same in an inverted form. But these people are picking up steam more than ever under Biden, and they're doing it. And they'll continue to do the same under Trump. They'll continue to shift their rhetoric under Trump, and I'm sure people will continue to join them as our material conditions worsen and as the two-party duopoly shows itself to be a piece of garbage. But this shows the importance of communism. This shows the importance of working class organizing and actually building an alternative system, and bringing an end to these fascistic groups. We can't do it through bourgeois elections. They're going to continue to grow no matter what imperialist bourgeois candidate we get. Israel's going to continue to commit their horrific crimes. People like Nick Fuentes are going to continue to use that to build an audience. And I don't think it matters who we elect. I think these right-wing forces are growing because of the deterioration of material conditions. And that's the problem with liberal analysis, though. They're all wrapped up in these bourgeois elections like they're the end of the world, while, things continue to progress without much change at all under each president. We've been going through 45 years of neoliberalism now and worsening conditions here in the imperial core. So, of course, some people are going to communism and some people are going to fascism. But the way to combat that is to bring more of them to communism. And I don't think it matters too much who we vote for. I had something else to say to a different part of your question, but I'll pass it to Carlos. I can't remember right now.
Well, there's been since October 7 a 200% increase in anti-Arab crime in the U.S., reminiscent of the post 9/11 era. So, I mean, this is why the liberal method of abstract thinking, disconnecting things from the context and the system that produced it, is not very fruitful. It's not fruitful at all. You're not going to be able to understand the world. Look, I don't think it's a genuine concern that's tied to Trump's election. It's tied to the general deterioration of the system, as Eddie mentioned it. And it's a deterioration that, insofar as we don't become a viable political force the American people can observe, these are people that, and I just got to talk about this in Noah's class, these are people that realize their life is shit. They are ready to dissent. They know something is wrong, but they can't find anywhere the systematic explanation that can explain to them how it's rooted in the capitalist system and how it's in their power to destroy it and overcome it and build something better. And so whatever fool comes and says, look, that is actually the object that embodies why your life is so desperate and immiserated and pervaded by debt, right? As that happens, they become susceptible to that because of the crisis and because we're not there in those moments of crisis. That's the same conditions that produce a rise of fascism, produce the potential for socialism. So I think that is something that's based on the system. It's going to happen regardless of who becomes president, just like the genocide. It's going to keep going. And the fight that we have is not to elect lesser evil, but to build up the popular forces that can go to these people that are dissenting and actually give them a real, truthful explanation of why their lives are miserable, connect them to other people who are dissenting in different ways, therefore giving all of the varied forms of dissent coherence, unity, and then on the basis of that, a sense of direction, which is what emerges when you have a clear understanding of the system. Now, you mentioned something very interesting in the first part of your comment, which is how the protests against the war in Iraq died down when they were carried forth by what Glenn Ford called the more effective evil of Obama and the Democratic Party. I think we have to remember, though, that we were, for a moment of time, I want to say 2019, on the brinks of a third world war, rooted in the murder of the slayer of terrorism, the unifier of people in the Middle East, General Qasem Soleimani. Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani. And the liberal media said nothing. No one was in the streets. No liberal uprising. No one in the liberal consensus and liberal hegemony gave a shit when Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani. It was just another dead Arab for them, a dead Persian. My apologies. So it's I don't think there's going to be the hysteria, a level of change in hysteria about the genocide if you put Trump in office. They might be hysterical about the things he says, but not about the actual policy. That's what the hysteria was rooted in the whole time. It's his mannerisms, the form that imperialist policy takes, not necessarily the substance. And I think it's going to be a much more hypocritical situation to see a bunch of liberal pundits criticize the form in which Trump carries out a genocide, and not the fact that he's carrying out or funding and equipping the Zionist entity with the means to carry out this horrendous genocide.
Yeah, shout out to Glenn Ford, rest in power, and our comrades at Black Agenda report. I'm not sure if they were the first ones. I think it was Margaret Kimberly and Glenn Ford who first coined the term Trump derangement syndrome. And again, I don't want to gloat. I don't want to celebrate how pathetic liberalism is. But at what point do these Americans break with the Democratic Party? How could you trust this leadership? I had liberals who were very good people and teachers and principals and educators, really, really solid human beings, right? And as of like a few weeks ago, they were still telling me, well, Joe Biden has that energy and I'm just like, what? Speaking of a house of mirrors, what world do you live in? I'm glad you brought up the hike in anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian hate crimes. That's something that I talk about in This Is Genocide, because we always hear this stuff about anti-Semitism, but what about the Islamophobia? And I did a hard look at this quote unquote rise in anti-Semitism. And if you Google that, there's like 1,000 headlines every day, right? And what they had done through the ADL and quote unquote stopantisemitism.com and these different organizations that seek to dox any of us and get us fired just because we're against the genocide, and then throw that anti-Semite label on all of us. What they do when they have their abstract calculations, which never ascend to the concrete because it's pure propaganda, they would say that somebody like me as a professor was guilty of an anti-Semitic crime because I taught the true 76 years of history of how, and you all spoke to this earlier, Israel is a Western creation. Some call it the 51st state of the U.S. But what we saw in the aftermath of October 7th, Biden arrived on a Tuesday. Who arrived on Wednesday? The Prime Minister of England. Who arrived on Thursday? Macron. Who arrived on Friday? It was the Chancellor of Germany. How telling that the entire arrogant imperialist West, they continue to rely on Israel to do their dirty work, the gas and oil extraction from these rich lands. And that's the true function of Israel. Israel has nothing to do with religion. That was just the Western and white fig leaf alibi that they used to justify their ongoing colonization of the region. And 2011, Libya, when NATO and the US were bombs away over Tripoli, over Libya, over the richest country in Africa, arguably along with Zimbabwe, the most sovereign country, the most self-determining country in Africa at the time. This is going back 13 years. When we went into the streets across this country, not one Democrat would ever join us. Not one Republican would ever join us. We had demonstrations of sometimes 15 people. I mean, when you're talking about New York City, the metropolitan area, you're talking about 25 million people. And in our biggest, not our biggest, they increased certainly, but in our initial demonstrations in solidarity with Libya, we would get 12, 14, 15 people into the streets. So when the ruling class beats the war drums, it's amazing how quick this populace, regardless of whether they're liberal or conservative, they fall into line with this fake, this faux bourgeois notion of patriotism. And then, of course, they hit us with all the, well, war and the military, this is very good for our economy and for our young people. And Stoltenberg, the Norwegian General Secretary of NATO, he said it 2 weeks ago. He said it so clearly. He laid out how much weapons sales from the U.S. to the NATO countries have increased and how good this is for the U.S. economy. For whose economy? For the bourgeois economy, for the weapons manufacturers, the top 6 weapons manufacturers. They're loving this. And is it a coincidence that those weapons manufacturers, Westinghouse was the former owner of General Electric was the former owner of NBC. And I think Westinghouse owned before Disney, ABC. So look at the ownership of these instruments of mass deception. It's the same Ministry of War. So why would they ever tell us the truth about the war on the Libyan people, the dirty, covert war against the Syrian people? And a lot of people don't realize that for 8 years, there was a genocidal war against Yemen right before the war on Palestine's never ended. It's a 76-year continuum. But I did want to throw something out, unless you all had something you wanted to respond to. Let me throw out, the New York Times did a panic piece today. I'm not sure if y'all got a chance to read it, but if you haven't read it, they sat down with Steve Bannon, who's off to jail for 4 months. He sounds actually like he's pretty excited to be off to jail. This is definitely an extensive opinion piece. It's worth reading. What Bannon does, let's go to so you can see us as well as the piece. What Bannon does is Bannon says, I'm not a journalist. I'm not trying to run no media outlet. I'm a general. And, I'm an anti-liberal general. This is our war headquarters. He says it straight up. And the New York Times is all over this. So the contradictions. And I think as we respond to all these different issues and questions, we're not taking abortion lightly for a second. We're not taking any manifestations of hatred of our trans sisters and brothers and white supremacy. We're not taking any of this stuff lightly. And I say that in the spirit of dialectics, because for me, it would be easy, after how pathetic Joe Biden is, and we've known how pathetic and genocidal he is and anti-people, it'd be easy to laugh in liberals' faces, but that's not going to win them over to a different line. So I want to highlight another passage from this article on Bannon. Well, what does Bannon have to say about Ukraine? So the New York Times asked him, you said something I've got to ask you about, that Trump's a moderate. In what areas is the MAGA movement farther right than Trump? I think farther right on radical cuts on spending, number one. I think this is Bannon speaking. I think we're much more hardcore on things like Ukraine. President Trump is a peacemaker. He wants to go in and negotiate and figure something out as a deal maker. I think 75% of our movement would want an immediate, total shutdown, not one more penny in Ukraine, and massive investigations about where the money went. And then he goes into a whole anti-immigrant and xenophobic thing about the wall and mass deportations, right? But the point I want to make before I throw it back out to you all, liberals should not fall for the rhetoric of the New York Times and CNN, who claim to hate Trump so much because it's the lack of diplomacy and the lack of niceties and how the way Trump speaks. It offends every liberal sensibility, right? Liberals have that knee-jerk, kinesthetic response, how disgusting Trump is. And that's the Trump derangement syndrome. Trump is more disgusting than a genocide. Speaking of cognitive dissonance, right? The liberals don't just hate Trump because he's so clumsy. They hate Trump because he is a random monkey wrench in their foreign policy designs. So imagine the fear they feel and what they're trying to force through, similar to what Trump was trying to do in his final days. There's discussion that the Democrats will pass before November a further $100 billion package for the next 10 years. That's already, speaking of enshrined, right? They can't enshrine Roe versus Wade, but they can enshrine, they can codify, they can guarantee $100 billion for a proxy war on Russia in Russia's geopolitical strategic interests, with the Ukrainian people, again, to the tune of how many tens of thousands, over 100,000 maimed and killed. And they want to put that all on Putin's hands. That's every liberal headline, and to some extent the conservatives. But again, there's no contextualization of the role of the U.S. in the NATO countries, the entire Western colonial world, the same ones carrying out a genocide and it's broadcast across the world on social media. So they're somehow looking for justice and self-determination. And before I throw it out to y'all, shame on these leftist groups, I'm not going to name them, who mimic the ruling class bullet points on Ukraine. How could that be? How can you not study dialectics? It's an insult. It's a slap in the face of our responsibility to engage in dialectics that these quote unquote leftist groups and even quote unquote Marxist parties, that they could be so weak on this a fundamental question of our age. So I throw it back out to y'all.
Eddie, you want to go first on this one, and then
Doesn't matter. Do you have something to say?
well, primarily that again, I think a lot of these debates are smoke screens and political footballs tossed around to fearmonger people into not voting for one party but voting against another party. This has been the strategy for a very long time, and I don't think that a good majority of the American people are falling for it any longer. I think this is going to be the first election in U.S. history where independents are the majority bloc. So there are literally more people outside of either the Democratic or Republican Party officially signed up as independents than there are within the two-party duopoly. And that's without counting how many people in both parties are discontented with the trajectory of the country. So, I mean, as far as the leftists who accept this narrative, I mean, I wouldn't, if we're operating with the actual significance of what's left being that which stands on the side of progress, right? Not that which is the most hip culturally on issues of sex or gender, but that which objectively stands against hegemony, against the ruling institutions of our day, that which, this is why it's aligned with communism, that which stands for the abolition of the current state of affairs, the movement forward of history, then none of these people are leftists. If they're standing with hegemony, if they're standing with liberalism, if they're standing with the cultural reasons why liberalism posits to need to support the Democrats, they're literally just rightists. I mean, you can have people who, in terms of the Americanized political spectrum of what's right and left, be on the right, take all the so-called wrong positions on cultural issues, but if they stand against the institutions of empire, the institutions of the deep state, the state, however we want to call it, the people call it the deep state, so whatever. If they stand against war, if they stand against these institutions, they are on the left objectively. If they don't, it doesn't matter how woke they are in terms of anything else. They're standing on the right, and that's what we've seen. We've seen such a distortion of what's left and what's right that now what's called left is objectively what is the most efficient in sustaining the reproduction of the dominant order. If we really understand that liberalism is hegemony, that wokeism is the primary form through which consent is obtained from the confused and alienated masses of people who are able to be manipulated into supporting a system on the basis of its supposed adoption of liberal values on certain cultural issues. If we understand the role that wokeism as a ruling ideological form of bourgeois ideology, then we can't continue to operate with a dichotomy that because a conservative worker who's anti-war, anti-FBI, CIA, anti-big pharma, anti the military-industrial complex, and all these archetypical institutions of the state, but because they have certain issues on certain positions that are not enlightened enough for the left on so-called left on gender, that those are rightist or that those are fascist. No, that's bullshit. The main question that sets apart left and right is where do you stand in relationship to the ruling hegemonic institutions? And I think that today a lot of the people that are called rightist in America are actually left, and a lot of the people that are called leftists, even some of them that put on the hammer and sickle on their profile, they're actually right. They're actually working to sustain hegemony, but through a radical veneer, through a form of indirect apologetics, through a very sinister and frankly today more effective way of defending hegemony.
And it's weird how the populist right, people like Steve Bannon is an expert at this. They're able to co-opt the socialist leanings of the masses better than the so-called left. The so-called left is just like, these Trump people are fascists. They're a basket of deplorables. We shouldn't even talk to them. Whereas Steve Bannon and Trump are like, yeah, we're going to end the wars and bring your jobs back. And also all of your problems are immigrants. They sprinkle in a little, bigotry, little anti-immigrant rhetoric and xenophobia with their working class populism. And it's a winning message. And obviously we shouldn't adopt the xenophobia, but we need to, reach these people and understand that people in this country are desperate for a new political movement. There's a crisis of legitimacy. They understand the two-party duopoly doesn't work, but we need to speak to them in a language that they understand, and we need to speak to them on issues that unify people together, and that benefit everybody. If we just go, browbeat working class people over the head with culture war stuff, they're just going to not listen to us, and then they're going to go vote for Trump. They're going to go vote for whoever Steve Bannon is endorsing. So, and that's the ironic thing about this leftist strategy of, oh, we can't talk to Trump people, they're evil. Talking to MAGA people is tailing Trump, blah, 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 blah. If you do that, if you tell these people to piss off and, don't even talk to them, they're just going to go hang out with other right wingers. They're just going to go be susceptible to Trump or worse, Nick Fuentes. So that's the importance of talking to people. And I know Danny's the best at that. Danny can talk to a wall. He makes friends everywhere we go. It's like Walmart employees, everything.
Well, Carlos told me, Carlos sat me down for a serious discussion. First, they made the Cuban food so he could kind of lure me in. And then he said, you can move out here. You can be out here permanently in the Midwest. And I was like, whoa, well, only if you come move to the swamp of wokeism that is the East Coast. we could trade places for a few months. It'd be an interesting ethnographic experience. I'll go back to well, there's some great comments in here, and I think there's some questions. There was a question or two that may have gotten by us, but I don't know how to restart them. Let's see. Here they are. Thoughts on RFK Jr. I mean, he's horrible on Palestine. I think he's certainly correct to question the pharmaceutical, medical, industrial complex. I think a lot of that critical thinking is important. Yeah, why wouldn't they let I mean, forget RFK Jr., but what were the legal reasons they give? Because every law, right, reflects the interests of the elites, the ruling class, the class in power. If they had Cornel West up in there last Thursday, oh my God, Cornel West would have gave it to them both, and they can't. It rips away this mask of democracy. There's so many people that could have been up in the mix, bringing heat to these two imperial fools, but they would never do that, because if there's a spokesperson of the people, a tribune of the people, to quote Lenin. Yeah, people have been asking about Project 2025. Steve Bannon actually talks about that. Yeah, the latest Supreme Court ruling about U.S. governmental agencies and their ability to influence policy decisions around the environment and other key issues. The Supreme Court ruled today that's going to be left to private corporations, and that's the deregulation that the Bannonites and the others are going for. So they certainly see this as a big victory today. We can look at exactly what Bannon says. He addresses it in the same interview. Bannon says, the New York Times asked, what do you think a second Trump administration would look like in the first few weeks? So there it is, Project 2025, and others are working on it to immediately focus on immigration, the forever wars, and on the fiscal and the financial. I wonder what he means by forever wars, if it's just the war on Russia, because he's saying wars. I can't think that Steve Bannon would ever care or think that a Palestinian is actually a human being. And I don't know if one of y'all wants to clarify too. I remember Trump saying, tried to call Biden a weak Palestinian. It was so weird. I couldn't even quite decode what he was trying to say. And simultaneously, the deconstruction of the administrative state and going after the complete, total destruction of the deep state. I mean, what does that mean? He's going to go after the FBI and the CIA. This would throw this country into a type of civil war just among the elites. Within the state, there'd be such deep fractions. And I think that's another point that we're making at Midwestern Marx. A Biden victory, a Democratic victory, it's the ongoing hegemony uninterrupted. A Trump victory throws the entire system, foreign policy, everything into disarray. Everything's up for grabs, similar to 2016. And one of the lessons of 2016, I can't tell you how many liberals, and a family member asked me, when you say the word liberals, do you mean a curse word? Yes, I do. One of the worst curse words. To quote Amiri Baraka, the great poet from Newark, New Jersey, the author of Blues People. Amiri Baraka had that the quote where he said, if you want to know who a liberal was the one on the plantation who went to the master and said, your treatment of these slaves is very harsh. I think you can do a little better. I think that's the essence of liberalism. What did Malcolm X say? Malcolm X said, the knife is in your neck 12 inches, and the liberal comes around and the liberal says, oh man, let's get that out at least an inch or two. And that's what the liberals call progress, as they continue to hemorrhage you and humiliate you and brutalize you and murder you and take away your self-determination. And to go back to Malcolm again, in terms of what Malcolm told the white liberals. He said, you really want to be on our side, on the side of oppressing working people in the struggle for, true self-determination for all people and for Black America. You got to do like old John Brown did. And Malcolm took it back to John Brown. So that lets you know how Malcolm X would be voting on November 5th.
Yeah, I think to go back to some of the questions specifically about RFK, when he first started running, people can go look back and see how wrong some of our predictions were, mine specifically. I thought he was just going to be like a Kennedy-style, honest, somewhat principled liberal. Principled, of course, within the confines of how principled you could be within liberalism itself, but a regular anti-war liberal that wanted to bring us back to a 1950-60 style sort of capitalism. And then Palestine happened, and I don't know if he got compromised or what, but he's completely shot himself in the foot because of the question of Palestine. Here I agree completely with Garland Nixon, who said that if it wasn't for Palestine, it's not unlikely that someone like RFK would win. I think he has a far better chance of winning than any of the other people running third party because of his popularity, his political capital, his cachet, the literal money that's behind him. So I have to think that he's somehow compromised, which is something that's very frequently done by the Zionist entity, because he's literally, I think, going to lose because of this issue. If RFK took the position that he takes with Ukraine on Palestine, forget about the two-party duopoly. I think he could present a real shoehorn to the two-party duopoly. I think on the basis of his even liberal, mild understanding of the war machine, the consistent position on Palestine would be to condemn the Zionist entity. That's the position his uncle, JFK, arrived at. JFK said that the two biggest enemies of America were McCarthyite anti-communist and Zionist, right? So I think he has to be in some form compromised by the Zionist entity, because it just really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And right before he went full-blown Zionist and he started connecting with that rabbi, I think, that got in a fight with Candace Owens, if someone can help me with the
Rabbi
name.
Shmuley.
Yeah, that
I
fucking
can't believe you would forget him. Such a
disgusting figure.
Noble.
Right before he started hanging out with that cat, he had tweeted out something in favor of Roger Waters. And when he got the heat for that, that's when he started connecting with that rabbi. At least that's the sort of temporality of events that I understood. I thought he had tweeted in favor, then deleted it, and then went full-blown Zionist. Yeah, that's what I would answer. By the way, thank you so much to the donors. Cognite, thank you so much for the $1 super sticker. Thank you, John Freeze. John has a question. Maybe we can get into it after Eddie answers. Yeah, let's Eddie, give us your answer, and then we'll get into the super chats.
I mean, I don't have much else to say. I think you guys covered it all. We can jump into what John said here.
Let me get one sentence before the super chat, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Any Irish descendancy that RFK Jr. has should be revoked. Race. I think that was part of where JFK and RFK were coming from. They came from an oppressed nation. We've seen how Ireland has stood up in solidarity. The Irish, we know all too well, 800 and some odd years of anti-colonial struggle. So certainly, I think even this bourgeois Kennedy family and some of the forefathers and foremothers would be disappointed in the position that RFK is taking.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, John Freeze, comrade. Hi, guys. Just now joining the stream. I'm wondering how America today resembles the Weimar Republic in terms of the liberal bourgeoisie being out of touch with reality. It's a very interesting comparison. I mean, what I would say is that the role, the functional role that fascism as a form of governance within the capitalist mode of life, the reasons why fascism came about in periods of crisis, the objectives it was set out to achieve, that has systematically been done by just the neoliberal stage of capitalism. Right? You used to bring the fascists in to fight back, beat back the working class and socialist movement, roll back the gains of the working class, create the conditions so that the rate of profits of capital could be bigger. You would expand, empires intimate within the belly of fascism, and it be the most terroristic dictatorship of capital, oppressing constantly working class people and oppressed groups. And that's what neoliberalism has done. Neoliberalism is defined by privatization, liberalization, austerity, and deregulation. And since the 90s, at least, unipolarity, the unrestricted ability until at least 2008 of the U.S. to impose its will on nations abroad. What the U.S. has done since the 70s on the international, on the global south specifically, debt trapping, all these things, it's kind of done at home as well. It led to the great financial crisis of 2008. So the reason why fascism was necessary for the bourgeoisie, neoliberalism has played the same function. So I think that speaking in terms of rise of Nazism in Germany is very interesting, because when the Nazis came in to do what the Nazis were given a lot of money by big businesses and finance capital to do, the neoliberal stage of capitalism in the US and Europe has already done, has already basically accomplished. So in some ways, the fascism is here, or at least what fascism came in for is already here.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on European history. I know a lot more about American, Latin American, and Asian history. I'm working on it. But one thing I do think is interesting that I've noticed in my political development is I learned early on that the Social Democrats were involved in the fascist murder of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. That was the name of the guy, right? The head of the German Social Democratic Party, or the biggest communist party in the world at the time. And when we were working for Bernie Sanders, that made 0 sense to me. That made zero. I was like, what? There was a powerful communist movement, and the Social Democrats sold them out so that they could get killed by fascists. And I heard people calling social democracy the moderate wing of fascism, and it didn't make any sense to me. Now it makes perfect sense to me. Look at the role that people like AOC play as radical recuperators, promising people change and then kowtowing to Nancy Pelosi, who is at the head or one of the high up figures, elite figures in a fascistic, genocidal, imperialist government. And then even, with our own experiences, anytime we call out someone like Nick Fuentes or whatever, there will be some ultra leftists or some social democrats in the comments saying, well, you're fascist too. Well, you're the real fascist. And right below them will be some actual fascists, calling us Jews or whatever, which they think is an insult. But you constantly see these social democrats teaming up with the fascists to attack communists. And they do it with smears. They do it in the most shady ways, claiming that we're the real reactionaries, lumping us in with the Nazis. Right. But we're the main people combating the Nazis. You don't see Nick Fuentes' ideology being constructed by or deconstructed by Kyle Kalinske or being deconstructed by the ultra leftists. It's us. It's Infrared. It's the Revolution Report. It's these, capital C communist organizations. And it's the Social Democrats who hop on the bandwagon with the Nazis to try and tear us down every time. And that slogan that used to make no sense to me, that social democracy is the moderate wing of fascism, after years of experience in the left, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, I'll just share a quick anecdote in terms of John's question, and then we're going to begin to wrap it up. We've all had a long day, got a big day coming up tomorrow. I'm hoping to bring back a show. I don't know who remembers out there. This is when I first met Midwestern Marx. We're coming up on my 1-year anniversary, but we had this show, Capitalism's Attack on the Soul, that I was able to do for I think 7 Tuesdays in a row with Noah and the comrades as well who are here joined. And I want to do bullying made in the USA and really get into the social roots of bullying. So we're gonna see what's on the menu for tomorrow. That was all interrupted by the genocide, and we had to pivot with all of our Marxist energy to stand with our Palestinian sisters and brothers. But I had a mentor. He wasn't my mentor. He was my mentor's mentor, and he was born in this time period. His name was John Black. He was a Marxist, born, raised in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and he used to tell these stories that even in kindergarten, in third grade, the communist youth students lined up over here with their uniforms and their colors and the International, and then the brown shirts, the fascist youth lined up over here. And when they wanted to actually leaflet, I don't know who out there who's ever leafleted and flyered and engaged people in conversation. Of course, for me, it was here in Union Square on 14th Street in New York City and wherever else. But an important skill, right? Especially for this generation, the generation of my 2 sons, who was raised with the internet. But how do we get into the streets? But during the Weimar Republic, what John Black had to do, John Black was the Marxist mentor to Dr. Andy McInerney, who was a Marxist mentor to me. He was the head of the mathematics department at Bronx Community College. But what John Black said was they would go up to the roofs of these tenements. This is in Germany in the 20s and early 30s. And they would put a stack of flyers and they would do kind of a homemade seesaw. And then they would, throw a rock quick and it would thrust, 1,000 flyers into the air over Frankfurt, over Berlin. And that's how they would get their message out. Because after they had killed Red Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, that was the level of fascism before the fascists. Under social democracy, that's how they had to operate. And we see tragically what happened. I think it is the responsibility of every internationalist, of every Marxist, to go to this hallowed ground where 27 million Soviets died to defend the Soviet motherland, where, of course, 6 million Jews in their very language, Yiddish, and all of revolutionary Yiddish land was incinerated in their libraries and the memory and the music, and as well as 6 million socialists. I mean, they started with the socialists and communists and in the left. Those were the original occupants of the death camps and concentration camps. And I think every son or daughter of the international working class, in a way, has a type of moral or ancestral, because those are our ancestors in a class sense that they murdered, just like the Palestinians today are the ancestors of how many of our Jewish sisters and brothers, forefathers, foremothers who were murdered in these concentration camps. And if they were alive today, they would be resisting as however they could, shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinians. Gaza is the new Warsaw Rebellion, if you will. So, any last thoughts, comrades, before we sign out?
Oh, we have a couple more super chats here. Thank you so much, Chima Madhu. The left is supposed to help all workers. The problem with too many U.S. leftists is that they try to be as unrelatable to the working class as possible. Yeah,
They actively try, Carlos. Are they conscious how out of touch they are with their wokeism?
Yeah, look, I think that there's a class component to this. It's a left that gets filtered sometimes through the media, sometimes through the NGOs, sometimes through the academy, but it ends up accepting the forms of relationality of the middle class, of the class that regular working people connect in their minds with, not their coworkers, but their managers, the HR department that calls them in to scream their ear out for a joke or something, the diversity, equity, and inclusion department, like the institutions of the managerial class, the class that the working class directly has in front of them as an enemy, because they don't see the shareholders and the real owners of they see their representatives in the managers. The left has adopted the relationality of that class, and that's why the working class doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Working class people, if they go into any of the clubs from any of the organizations on the left today, and they talk how they would in the shop floor, they get canceled in 5 minutes, never to return. And I've seen it. Like there's people in all parties of the U.S. who have stood there and said that Noah has to be condemned as a fascist white chauvinist. I mean, it's so completely ridiculous. One of the maddest moments I ever had in my whole entire life was when some idiot from the Communist Party USA told someone in his party, Noah, that he was a fascist and a white chauvinist. If Noah, who is a working class carpenter that wakes up at 4 a.m. to read Marxist theory until he gets to work at 7 or 8, and then comes back from his 9-to-5 job to read Marxist theory and educate people, if Noah is not pure enough for these fucking idiots, then no one is. These people are not serious about revolution. They're not serious about advancing the class struggle. The only thing they're serious about is their little monastery leftist identity politics based groups that they want to keep sufficiently pure, sufficiently safe from its desecration by a general public, of which is included a working class that is done with their middle class shenanigans. So I couldn't agree more with the sentiment here.
Many of whom receive $80,000, $100,000 salaries from foundations, and their imagine if we were full-time communist workers, like, you know, and with Noah, I would just add the nicest, most gentle, you know, warm-hearted human being you've ever met, and then that was just me going out there and meeting him in Cleveland and then in Dearborn. But this PMC class who thinks they're better than everyday working people, like we never receive a dime for all the work we do for the people. So incredibly arrogant, this whole cancel culture, people canceling everyday volunteers as they get $100,000 salary. It doesn't line up.
Absolutely. Me and my buddy Brock, who Carlos knows is another great friendly guy who has gotten less involved with communist organizing since the Bernie campaign because he was so fed up with the left, but is very sympathetic to what we're doing. We had a saying when we would go knock on people's doors and they'd scream at us, like, "God, you stupid socialist, blah, blah, blah." We'd be like, "All right, you're getting healthcare too." And it kind of diffused the situation. They wouldn't know what to say back. We'd be like, "Listen, you can yell all you want, but I'm going to give you healthcare, and there's nothing you can do about it." That's the attitude you got to have towards people whose consciousness is backwards. Because you realize when you go talk to all those people, like, they're not yelling at you. they have been tricked, they have been confused, they have been taught that socialism is evil. And some of them will never come around, but some of them will. And even if you end a conversation with someone yelling at you, or it doesn't seem that productive, who knows? Maybe they think about it, they feel bad about it, and then someone else comes along and waters the seed that you planted in their head, and then it grows, and they're able to see some development. I mean, Mao said it best. It's like the simplest quote, but it's like, when it comes to members of the masses who are backwards politically, you shouldn't isolate them. You should go to them and encourage them to go forward. Like that, it's as simple as that. But a lot of people on the left don't want to do that. They just want to sit on Twitter and try and virtue. A lot of it is virtue signaling. Right? That's a great word to describe it. It's like, I am the most left. I am the most pure. I hate fascists the most. I label all Republicans as fascists and don't talk to them. I am the most Marxist. And it's like, a lot of people think Marxism is just liberalism, but then you threaten to kill everybody who doesn't agree with you. That's how a lot of these people and these Maoists on Twitter act. But yeah, agree with, and thanks for the super chat, Chima.
That's so true. I can see so many like anime profile picture accounts in my head right now that do precisely that. They just take whatever is hip and liberal and just say, and just add like a fucking AK-47 to the meme. It's so incredibly ridiculous. But thank you so much.
My bad. Let me just show a book that responds directly to this. Virtue Hoarders: The Case Against the Professional Managerial Class, Catherine Liu.
Yeah, that one's good. She's coming from a Sochdem tradition, so she basically ties the virtue hoarders to the Bolsheviks and the vanguard, which is garbage. But there are comments within that book about the managerial class and the left that are kind of gold. It's just unfortunate that she's kind of a rabid anti-communist in terms of its connection to the Bolsheviks.
It's like Naomi Klein. You get so much good analysis, and then she'll be like, and that's why these capitalists are just like communists.
Yo, but she killed it with the title, like Virtue Hoarders. Like, I clearly haven't read the book, but when I saw that title, I was like, I gotta read this.
Yeah, that's just like the Left Is Not Woke one from Susan Neiman, which I know Danny just ordered recently. It's pretty good, but she's another one of those social democrats who's deeply anti-communist and does that equivocation that is archetypical of Western Marxism, the Western left, and that's fully accepted and embraced by the capitalist ruling class.
This is another one that I read for class in college that the author happened to get banned for then. But it's interesting too for people who are terminally online like me. It goes through the culture wars and a lot of these left-wing politics, quote unquote left-wing woke politics that existed only on Tumblr. But then all of a sudden, almost overnight became mainstream once the ruling class realized they could use it to divide people. And at the time, this came out like way early in the history of all the woke stuff. So Angela Nagel ended up getting canceled for it, but it's really interesting, and it's exactly what I said, like kill all normies. Like that was one of the slogans that was going on like 4chan or whatever, like just kill all normal people. That's what a lot of leftists act like Marxism is. But great book. I need to reread that one. I haven't read it since I was in undergrad and mentally slower than I am now.
That's a great pool. I had forgotten about Angela. I can't remember who it was that I was recently talking to about her, but she was making these amazing points, and then she got so canceled. She just kind of disappeared. I haven't seen her do anything. But one of the things she basically argues is that, like, the reason why the left is so middle class, it's because it's what Noah would call the reproletariat. All these people that are basically salty at the fact that they were promised a good, secure standard of living, but then they're given a bunch of shit. So they base their socialism, their leftism or whatever, on the unique characteristics of their declining, no longer middle, quote unquote, professional managerial class position. But thank you so much, Mario Figueroa. Love the channel. Thank you, brother, for your support. $2 super chat. Thank you so much to Good Pro for picking up the book and for appreciating it. I hope
What's up, buddy?
It's pretty short. It's the sort of thing I think you can get done in 1 or 2 sittings. So make sure to get yourself a copy, MidwesternMarks.com or MidwesternMarks.com/books. Thank you, Sean Moon, for picking up the Purity Fetish. I hope you enjoy it. That one's a little bit longer, but it's still very short read. You can get done in a day. Everyone loves Noah, the people's favorite. Noah's amazing. One of the best human beings I've literally ever met. Battle Cossack with the 200 Argentinian pesos. Thank you so much, comrade. Peronism, just like Western Marxism, has been co-opted by so-called progressives. Yeah, in Spanish, they call them los progres. I had an interview with Spanish podcast, and the whole time I was describing the left, he's like, "Oh, those are los progres." Yeah, that's how they call them. And social democrats for their own gain. If they could co-opt Marxism, then they can take then they could do it to any national movement that opposes U.S. imperialism. Yeah, the problem is that they're not co-opting Marxism. They're not really co-opting anything. They created these forces that now pass themselves off as Marxism precisely to attack the real Marxism, the real communists. This is the foundation of the compatible left in the post-war period, through institutions like the Congress for Cultural Freedom and many others that were literally designed to create a left that can challenge the communists, be anti-communist, be culturalist, and be generally alienating to the American public. But yeah, I agree. I just don't think they co-opted anything. That's literally their whole intended purpose. But do you guys want to comment on this one before I go to the next super chat?
No, keep going.
Thank you so much, What75 and Huh89. Great name for the $20 super chat. Biden advocates have recently highlighted his supposed shift from supply-side economics, citing examples of increased negotiation for drug prices, etc. What do you make of these claims? Is there any validity? What do you guys think about this?
I would need to look into them more specifically. I know he's done, minor regulations to try and bring drug prices down, which is an example of, I think, capitalist presidents using, sort of socialistic economic planning in a way, or a small version of centralization of the economy to enact like the most minor reforms in order to try and get themselves elected. And in order to give Biden talking points against the people who say that he hasn't accomplished anything for the American people, when if he was pushing, a more radical policy like nationalization of big pharma or whatever, maybe he could get some more concessions. And, of course, that's what we really need to fix the system. But yeah, especially when you mentioned supply side economics, right? The government regulating the supply of a good in order to try and bring about a more socially beneficial outcome. That's a method of socialist economic planning within capitalism. And a lot of this is a lot of what I'm writing about in my new piece, so I won't get too in depth here, but our capitalist system has evolved a lot, and it's concentrated in centralized wealth at the top, which creates the conditions for the possibility of socialism. It makes it really easy to take the productive forces out of the hands of these Wall Street speculators who, have nothing to do with production. They don't even know what they own. They just have their fingers in everything. And there's also all these things that the government does, like controlling the money supply through the Federal Reserve, or trying to regulate certain industries that are like forms of socialist economic planning, but they do it on a capitalist basis. They do it in order to actually maintain the capitalist relations of production and prevent anything radical. And FDR was probably the best example of that. And that's when our system saw a lot of transformations towards a more socialistic system. And again, people say you shouldn't call it, socialism when it exists within capitalism, but it is kind of socialism. Our system is morphing on its own towards a more socialistic system where the means of production are centralized and the economy is centrally planned. They just centrally plan it for the production of surplus value. But when it comes to that question in specific, I think Biden is probably doing some of that central economic planning to enact very, very minor half measures that won't anger the insurance industry and won't anger the pharmaceutical industry too much, but might help him to get elected, because those are also his donors. So he can't do anything too radical or too helpful. Otherwise, he'll lose the support of big pharma and their lobby.
In the Sackler family, who's supposed to be paying tens of billions of dollars to roughly 150,000 victims every year of the opioid epidemic, the courts just ruled in their favor. So their payments, quote unquote, to invest in solutions to the opioid crisis have been interrupted. And of course, again, every law reflects the interests of those in power.
Yeah, by the way, that was a great question. Thank you so much for that. The good pro here is right. It's like putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound and saying you'll be fine. Unless there's a national health system, as Eddie mentioned, we won't have the crisis in the healthcare system solved, then that itself won't happen until there's a power shift in this country from the ruling capitalist elite to the working class, just because of how big a role big pharma plays within the capitalist mode of life as a whole in America. And for those interested, you have to check out the article that Eddie did for the second issue of the Journal of American Socialist Studies. It's a Marxist historical materialist analysis of U.S. healthcare, and it's terrific. So you'll learn a lot from it. There it is. Wannabe Shred 666.
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah, of course.
Sweet. Thank you, Wannabe Shred 666, for the $5 super chat. Appreciate that. We're a people's funded institute, of course. Thank you all for your super chats. What steps should the American people take to dismantle both parties? For now, we need a real revolutionary party in this country, right? That's in the works. People are working on creating a real American Communist Party that serves the people. But what you can do now, organize workplaces, organize your community, but read. Do not underestimate the power of political and economic theory. The people who tell you that, you're not going to find the answer to anything in dusty old books, you just got to go out and hit the streets like an anarchist, right? Those people are either very misguided or they're actual feds. Trust that when you are reading, you are changing the way that you think in order to help you see through the bourgeois propaganda. You are giving yourself a shield against bourgeois propaganda, and you are making yourself into a more effective organizer who can reach working class people and actually explain to them what the communists stand for and what Marxism is. And you don't even have to use words like communist and Marxism, but do not underestimate the classics. Right? There's that old joke where Marx, Engels, and Lenin were asked, would you ever rather have a wife or a mistress? And Marx said, I would rather have a wife. Engels said, I would rather have a mistress. And Lenin said, I would rather have both so they can hang out while I find a solitary place to read. And, guess who led the first successful communist revolution in history? It was Vladimir Lenin. And he was mocked by this. I have a Lenin biography by Robert Service, a conservative historian, that mocks Lenin. Oh, he thought he was going to find the answer to revolution in books. He didn't want to go meet the people. And of course, that's bullshit. Lenin was beloved by the people, and that's all they did was go to unions and go to the people, no matter how reactionary they were, and try to win them over and break up anti-Semitic and fascist organizations and win people away from them. And they were totally ingrained in the people. But for years, they read and studied to hone their rhetoric, to hone their line, and to make themselves better organizers. And, that was the key. That's why Lenin said, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And yeah, theory without praxis is useless, right? But praxis without theory can be just as useless or even counterproductive. because you're out there acting like an anarchist, and you're making, you know, the left seem less appealing to people. So read. That's what Lenin, you know, there are weeks when decades happen and decades where weeks happen. For years, Lenin was reading and propagandizing and educating and reading, and then things took off with the party, and you can tell in his writing he wishes he had more time to sit down and read, but he can't because he's so busy with the revolution. He has so many tasks at hand. He can't just sit down and read and write anymore. But it was that reading and writing that laid the groundwork, laid the foundation for the revolution to come. So that's the stage that we're in right now.
And in that spirit, that's what we do. We're training. I remember being in Haiti when things popped off in 2021, and it's like, all them books, all that Haitian history, all them years of being immersed in Creole. This is it. This is it. This is why I did it. And I think we have to be revolutionary optimists. You know, every liberal in the country right now is running around, and that's kind of what provoked this stream. And they're having this existential crisis. We see opportunity, and we see a historical responsibility. So I think always being a revolutionary optimist, like in my department, when I gave anti-colonial context on October 7th, 8th, 9th, and every day of the calendar year, not one professor stood with me. They told me I was crazy and I was supporting terror. But when you're well-rooted in dialectical materialism, you never have to stand down. Always represent this, our pole of hope and struggle.
As Lenin once said, those who waddle in their pessimism are usually middle-class people with a lapse in understanding. If you understand the system correctly, you know there's a way forward. That's why they're scared of this new rising American communist movement, because we present the actual way forward, not in a form and wrapped in a veneer that's anathema to regular working people, but from the people themselves. Thank you so much, Leo, for the $2 in some currency that I'm not sure of right now. Who lost the debate? What debate? Wasn't a debate. Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more. It was a clown show. Presidents talking about golf in the middle of their first debate. It's the most ridiculous. Biden's wife, after the debate, basically giving him a participation trophy. Oh my God, you answered every question. I mean, it's elder abuse. It's sad. I might sound a bit Confucian here, but even genocidal war criminals, when they get to that age, put them in a nice home, take them to the George Bush Houstonian, and let them let them rest. You know, he's an asshole. He's always been an asshole, but now he's, as Garland said, he's a shell of the former man who did the crimes.
Let him rest. Let him rest behind proletarian bars. That's what he deserves. And Leo Siqueira, I think those are reais. So o povo foi aqui from Brazil. O povo foi que perdeu. We know the people of the U.S. and the people of the world really lost. Where was the voice of the people? Where was the voice of anti-imperialism? And again, where's the freedom of speech? Everyone complains, but this is by design. The ruling class knows exactly what they're doing, and it's meant for us to be pessimistic. If you're trapped within those perimeters that they've defined, and sometimes my students will stay deep into this. So, professor, are you, because the students don't know, the students are here, right? Liberal, conservative. And the students will say, but professor, are you this or are you that? And I'm like, what do you think? What an insult. But this is how they want to keep us trapped. So keep exploding those blinders.
Absolutely.
If I could say something real quick, right? One of the most frequently appearing comments that I've seen on the American public's reaction to the debate is 330 million Americans. And this is what we can come up with. These are the two people we have. And it should remind us of how much of a farce American so-called democracy is. Compare it to China. where today is the 103rd anniversary of the Communist Party of China, the most glorious Communist Party in human history, a party that has lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty, that waged the largest anti-colonial revolution successfully in the history of humanity, and that represents the embodiment of hope for humanity today. This party, as Zhang Weiwei, one of their main theorists, makes clear, for them, it's not just about election. The people have selection and election. The people are able to not only elect the people that are presented to them, but they're also capable of selecting the sort of individuals that are going to stand before them for election. And that's something that we have never had the opportunity to do. All we're given is various puppets of the capitalist master class to choose from, never the ability to select who it is, what type of individual, what class, what interest, what drives it is that are moving them. We've never been able to actually select who it is we want as possibilities to elect. So that's a distinction that Zhang Weiwei makes that I think shows how in China is where you actually have government, a society of by and for the people. The Chinese are the ones that most readily embody the American dream. America is nowhere near embodying that American dream of, by, and for the people that Lincoln famously proclaims in Gettysburg. It is the Chinese who have been able to realize the society that the greatest Americans thought America could be. And now today, those who betray that American aspiration and democratic creed want us to think that the Chinese are our biggest enemies, when in reality, the Chinese in their governance, in their socialist democracy, are the ones that most readily embody the best values that the American people align themselves with in their own tradition. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that. By the way, thank you so much to Slava for the $5 super sticker. I'll be with Slava and the Revolution Report people in the Chicago Workers' School July 13th. I'll be presenting on my book, Why We Need American Marxism. So you can hit up Slava or Revolution Report for the address. I think for obvious reasons, we're not going to make it public, but you'll see me there. You'll see Kyle. Eddie will be able to see you there as well.
I hope so. I'm planning on it right now. I have something the 16th, but I believe that's the 13th, right?
Yeah, the 13th to the 14th. Yeah.
Yeah, I should be able to make it.
So. There you go. You should be able to see Eddie along with myself and everyone else at the Revolution Report crew. So consider coming out. Hit up Slava for the address. And yeah.
Absolutely. Can't wait to meet some more people. Those are always fun.
So, folks, this has been a great conversation. We'll come back tomorrow speaking about a topic focused on CPUSA. If you haven't already, make sure to buy my recent book, Why We Need American Marxism. Again, Midwestern Marx prices, $15, paperback, $10 for the ebook. Get your copy, learn, share the ideas with your coworkers and people in your communities. Any other remarks before we head out, guys?
I don't think so. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow us on X. Follow us on Instagram. All our links are down there. Yeah, and stay tuned. Join our Discord, too. There's a lot of stuff in the works, and that's the best way to stay up to date. We're doing a lot of stuff with organizing on the ground, not just going to conferences like the Revolution Report, but we've got other stuff going on as well that we can get people involved with. So, yeah, if you want to stay up to date and help us take down this two-party duopoly and the capitalist system, join the Midwestern Marx Discord.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In a world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations. We've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the fields. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in a song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The International ideal unites the human